Hello, this is Blair Stanislao with the Happy Lion Center. Welcome to our podcast, Mystical and Infamous, where we have playful and easy conversations about anything mystical, getting to the heart of all things strange and weird. Join us in a bit of magical tomfoolery, spreading the alchemy of love and light. And now, we invite you to enjoy the show.
Oh, this is what's coming. And so a lot of people, of course, they pop on and they're like, I just want to know what's going to happen for 2024 because I feel stuck, you know? And you're like, no, you're not stuck. So I've actually been sharing some of like the information and like the channeling, the download that I've been getting about the 2024 energy. And for me, when I feel into it, it feels very exciting and very vibrant because, you know, we're in the year of the 8, right? Which is the year of abundance. Mm-hmm. But everybody when we say abundance, everybody thinks abundance means like, I'm going to get some money, right? Well, there's so many other areas in our life that's abundant. But I think the key for this year is the energy that's behind the abundance is really that creative energy. So if there's something that you're wanting, you know, because we like everybody's like, I want to manifest, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, if I think positive thoughts, I'll get what I want. If I think I want $1 million, I'll get $1 million, right? But that's not the case, right? So part of what I was kind of talking about was like the two things being connected, like abundance and manifestation, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it's the energy that's behind it. And here's what I think is so exciting because it's the creative energy behind it. So this year is a year where things that we've been maybe wanting to create, but maybe in our minds we feel stuck or we don't feel like we're being creative, that energy is opening up to flow, right? So that we can be abundant in the area of creating. So for example, I'll use myself, like for my business, like, you know, I felt like a lot of things were shifting towards the end of the year. And we talked about like taking time off, and it was nice to have that time off, just allow things to be, because I am the type, I'm like a doer. I'm like, oh, I got this idea. I really want to do it. I want to do it, but it may not be the right time. Right. And at the end of 2023, like that wasn't creative energy. It was just, you know, now we've got that old energy that's going out. And then it was literally like when January 1st hit, I woke up so optimistic and really ready to create. And so, of course, that's what I've been doing, is putting my creative energy into my business. But also too, the other thing is with the creative energy, it's got to be your own creation. Like, you can't I'm not saying you can't, you can do whatever you want, right? But if you go and let's say you see somebody doing something in particular and you're like, oh, I want that, then sit down with it and really think about it, how it would work for you and not the same way that they're doing it, because they've already created that energy, right? That works for them. So when we talk about creative energy, it's what energy works for you, not a creative energy that you copy. Because anytime we copy, it's not.
I was just thinking, you know, you're saying works for you, and this is a language that we use, like that's just normal, common. That makes sense, right? Okay, but I think it's maybe a little more precise to say, instead of what works for you, it's more like you got to attach. I find that you have to attach it to feeling. So like you see somebody and they have something or they're doing something that you want. It's not that you necessarily want exactly what they have. You might not, but you like something about what they've created. And really what you're desiring is to feel a certain way because it has happened. So it's really, you're going towards that feeling. And it's been my experience that when you really address the feeling of things, it's like energy work. It's just like, boom, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I did a manifestation, little tiny 3-day thing. Right. And I've done these before. And of course I was the recipient this time. So I was just doing the work for myself. Right. And I first started off with money, right? Money was one of the things. And then she's asking you to get into what you align with, what you feel. And I'm like, actually it's not money. It's a different kind of feeling about something. Right. And so I think mine eventually turned into, I want to create a life of luxurious self-care And I don't remember
Oh,
what
I'm like, that sounds so nice.
it does, but let me
Like,
tell you, I
yeah.
got it right away. Okay, like boom. Okay,
Wow.
but then I was like, wait a minute. If I need self-care, that means I need something to be like I've got to attend to something, right? So it's not necessarily the
Uh,
self-care that I do want to do that, right? But it's not necessarily the self-care that I wanted to be in a lap of luxury about. I don't know. I still have to refine that. But that's where like you were saying, the affirmations, that can be kind of tricky because you say, I want this thing. And then it's like, okay, so if you say you want this thing, first off, you have to acknowledge that you don't have it. So you're putting energy into not having, right?
mhm.
And then you've got some energy going towards what you want. And so then it's like this counterbalance and back and forth.
Yeah, it's literally like this tug of war, right?
Yes.
Or to kind of elaborate on that, to add on to it, is are people who say, I really want this, and then they follow it up with but, and
Yes.
then whatever is behind the but is usually like a very like heavy vibration, right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, but I really want this, and I don't understand why I can't have it. And so I always tell them, well, I want you to look at your butt, right? Like, let's take a look at your butt. And they're like, what? I'm like, you, when you say I really want this, like I feel the high vibrational energy, and then as soon as you hit the butt, it's just like it drops.
Yeah.
And so I do compare it to a game of like tug of war, right? So it's just pulling back and forth. And when it's in alignment, like if you really think about the rope, right, the rope then straightens and then there's balance in the rope. So both sides could hang back at the same time and not move anywhere. And they'd both be holding each other up, right? So we kind of like it does, like we kind of have to have our want, like you said, our want and our energy, or our want and our emotional energy all in alignment. Like it's got to be all the same. So if I'm going to be excited about it, I want my butt to say, or maybe not even use butt, but maybe like the butt is, I really want this, but maybe, or, even if it's like, but I need to get more alignment with it. Well, how do you do that? Right. So you got to
Yeah.
start really digging deep and saying, okay, how does this feel? And you're right, everything is about feeling, right? Because there's a lot of things that I want that when I think about it and I really really feel into it, I'm like, well, maybe I don't want it that bad,
Yeah.
so
And you do have to spend that time because I mean, the whole time I was like, oh yeah, it totally lit me up. And it was all about that. And I did experience, I really did. I did enjoy it because I love healing kind of things, right? I love taking care of
Mhm.
myself. Um, but some of those experiences were in fact because I really needed to deal with something, right? And it was like, oh, this is not easy. Not
Yes,
necessarily
yeah.
that I wanted, but yeah. And I was thinking like was just having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about the feeling of alignment and also like the use of language that has a lot of stigma associated with it.
Mhm.
Like to describe what it is that you want, if you go with the feeling part of it, you don't necessarily wind up having all the stigma. Like we were actually talking about labels that people get for whatever reason, whether it be, if
Mhm.
they're in school and they get labeled or they live some sort of particular, or they like some particular kind of lifestyle and therefore that gives them a label in society, right?
Yeah.
So labels are helpful in some ways, but again, they're also hindering in another way.
Mhm.
But it's the aligning with what it is you want to get from that. Like, why do you want to do those things?
Mhm.
I kind of find that
Yeah.
interesting. Like actually so I have teenagers, right? And I've been a teacher for like 10 years almost. I've been
Yeah.
around teenagers for a long time. And I find it really interesting if you watch a child, especially when they're trying something new, you can, you can see them kind of go towards something. And oftentimes I'm like, what are they doing? What is it they want out of that situation? Like, let's say they'll be friends with somebody who isn't maybe in my opinion, they're not the best alignment for that child, right?
Mhm.
But they continue to kind of want to hang out with this person or do these things. And it's like, what is it you're really trying to get from this experience?
Right.
But and if you actually ask them, they will eventually tell, especially kids, because they're usually like they just tell you straight up. I
Yeah,
like
I'm like, they're so
I
like,
feel good.
"Blah, here it
Yeah.
is." Yeah.
Yeah, they don't know how to filter quite as bad.
No, no. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I absolutely agree. Like, I kind of want to go back to the emotion part because that's, I mean, as human beings, we're very emotionally driven anyways. Even people who we say are emotionally turned off.
Mhm.
Well, there's emotion to that, right? Like there's still something in that. So I like, and to go back to like the creative energy, like I think you nailed it on the head, right? Because when we think and words, right? When we think of creativity, we think of, oh, like I have to design something or I have to put something together. Well, truth of the matter is that creative energy is absolutely that. It's all about emotion, right? So if you want to, if you want to buy that fancy car or, whatever it is, or, maybe it's just to take a vacation, the way that you can create that, or like I say, create or feel into that is at like, and again, it goes back to manifestation, right? Is putting yourself in that position, right? So for me, I would love to take like a nice, just relaxing vacation. So to bring that to me and to create it in that energy, right? What do? I daydream about being at my vacation where where that my phone isn't ringing, nobody, like maybe nobody cares where I'm at because they're doing their own thing, so I don't have to be bothered, whatever it is, and I'm sitting outside and I'm taking like a deep breath in because it's like crisp fresh air, like. So when and also when you daydream about that, I love to call it daydreaming because that's what I do. I totally zone
That's
out and
what it
start
is.
thinking about it. Then it's in it may, and like again, it's not a matter of how did you, like what you daydreamed about. It's all about, what did that feel like? Did it feel good when I was sitting there? Was I relaxed when I was sitting there? Right. And that's really the creative part, like that you're creating. And then, that's what those frequencies are going to attract, to bring into you. So
The daydreaming, I think, is really a perfect. I mean, I've heard it over and over, but really is such a beautiful representation because there's not a lot of stuff stuck to daydreaming. Everybody does it.
mhm,
They understand it. They know that it's fun. They know that people want to do it. But of course, we all have to get out of it so we can live in the real world, right?
right.
So, but there's usually is not like this overpowering, you did this terrible thing, you made a bad decisions, oh, you're a bad person. It's just like, oh, stop daydreaming.
Yeah.
Really, that's where it is. It really is that creative juiciness. I mean,
Oh,
through the years, and I'm sure you would agree with this, that one of the things that I found is like the absolute most important. And I finally figured out actually this week, I finally realized and actually verbalized it. This is why people like me, and this is why people come to me, is because as a healer, whatever you want to,
mhm,
whatever name that is, right? Like the idea that a healer is somebody who allows you to feel safe and forget the stories you tell yourself that put you in dis-ease long enough that you can
mhm.
remember what it feels like to be healthy, so that
Yes.
when you leave there, then you can remember again what it feels like to be healthy. And then we essentially daydream about that, right?
Yes.
But we have to, as healers, we have to see people as whole and complete and beautiful as they are. And that's like
Mhm.
one of the first things that I experience of all of my sessions is when the person actually feels truly seen. Oftentimes you have an emotional response, which is great, right? Because it
Mhm.
opens the door for feeling the emotions. But just that, like, just being able to be seen by somebody as complete,
Right.
as whole, as beautiful, as already having done the stuff that they say that they want to do and they haven't done yet physically in this world.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
it's kind of like that's what we're doing when we're manifesting. We're daydreaming, we're seeing that thing that we really want to have happen, and we're seeing it from the space of love. Like we do
Yes.
that and it's good and it feels great. And that's when it really does. That is the manifestation. It's not,
Yeah. And yeah, from love, there's no programming, there's no beliefs in that. You're just allowing that part of your imagination to just flow so freely. So when I was a child, I used to get in trouble all the time for daydreaming, but I loved it. And let me tell you, I had some like wild daydreams, like very, very fantasy like daydreams, right? But what but one of the things was is that I may have been like daydreaming this fantasy idea of daydream, but again, I would manifest really quickly. And what I was doing in that daydream is I was just embodying. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but like I was just embodying all of those emotional frequencies that just made every cell in my body dance. And that's where like truthfully, like you said that's where the juice is, the magic is, right? That's where like the pizzazz happens. And the minute that I could feel that with every fiber of my being, it was interesting because now, like when I look back at things, like stuff would manifest so quickly. It obviously wasn't like, whatever fantasy,
Yeah.
because
Was it unicorns flying?
yeah, like literally, like I was just, I was kind of a wild I had a wild imagination, but you know what it was? Like, what was that feeling of flying, right? That feeling of freedom. And so maybe what would happen is that like maybe as a little kid, I got to go to the park by myself for a day. You know what I mean? Like it sounds so little, or maybe it might sound like so ridiculous to be able as a kid to go to a park by yourself for the day. But like I was not allowed to do that. Like I would always have to go with my brother. So and literally the reason I bring this up is because this daydream for so long ago is coming to mind.
Mhm.
I remember daydreaming going to the park, and the park was just like this fantasy land. Like you want to talk about like unicorns, but and then what happened, right? Like I ended up getting to go to the park by myself, and guess what I turned that park into?
The fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, my daydream. And what the feeling that I had was just this freedom to like float on clouds, talk to trees, like, so I I mean, obviously I don't daydream. Well, I don't say that often. I mean, sometimes I still have some wild ones, but not so childlike. But there's moments where I want to go back to that because there was nothing attached to it except that vibration that was in alignment with me, that alignment with oneness, and that alignment of who I am, right? So, I love daydreaming. I'm actually finding myself doing it like more and more. And then I catch myself and I'm like, oh, I'm daydreaming. And I'm like, let's stay in this a little longer. But
Yeah.
but there's a lot of magic out there, right? I feel like we're surrounded by magic all the time.
Yeah. We just don't see it, or don't see it as magic, but yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Or,
kind of like I heard somebody say in a conversation within the last 3 weeks, this person was talking about manifesting or something. And she was trying to encourage other people to just allow themselves, essentially go to the unicorn park. Okay. So like, what is it? What is it that you could really like, if you really had no barriers whatsoever, this reality is not real. What do you really want to experience? And I don't remember if somebody else was responding or not, but it was like, she was saying, it doesn't matter. Cause I think the person said something to the contrary, like, but that's not realistic or da, 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 da. And she's like, so what? It doesn't matter if it's realistic.
Yeah.
Go into that space where you're actually really daydreaming that stuff. And I'll tell you, I'll share with you. I've shared it before, but I don't think we've actually talked about it. When I was in high school, I used to ride my bike a lot. So like I rode it almost every day, 10 to 12 miles. Well, I feel like that's a lot. Who knows what it's in comparison, but
I was just thinking, wow, that's incredible.
So I used to ride my bike, and I love riding my bike. I mean, I haven't done it in a while, but I do love riding my bike, and I definitely loved it back then. And I used to actually call it absorbing because my friends would be like, "Oh, you're riding your bike again? Like, when are you going to be done?" Like it was kind of getting in their way. And I was like, "Yeah, I am." And they would tease me and I'd say, oh, I'm out there, I'm absorbing. Like I was just getting this stuff from whatever. Basically, I was daydreaming, right? I was having
Yeah.
time. I was doing something physical that occupied the body that didn't destroy. I didn't have to like put all my attention on it. So I didn't realize that that really is the perfect recipe for manifestation because you're feeling good, your
Mhm.
body's occupied, everything's in tune. There's no judgment because you don't have anybody else there to talk to or anything.
Yeah.
And I can remember a very specific time I went a different route and I went out of our neighborhood and I went down this road, which I used to think was in the country. Okay. I have now gotten much older and realized that was not the country, but it was the country for us.
Yeah, for you at that
Yeah.
time.
And
Yeah,
I
it could
went
be
by
anything you
this,
want.
I went by this dairy and I remember thinking, oh, how cool would it be to marry a farmer? Because, there's like this beautiful farm. And it's like, oh, I could like run around and play. I could ride my bike there all day or whatever. And so I allowed myself to daydream. And so I thought about things. And one of the things that I really remembered was, oh, we could get married and, I would do so much stuff, but I don't want to do all the hard work, like all that gross stuff. I don't think, and then what if he dies? Because my father died, right? So of course that comes in and I was like, oh, but I also want to be able to like let it go because I don't want to be bogged down by that if that person's not there anymore, right? Totally, completely forgot about it until probably 6 months after my husband died. And I was walking down the road and I was like, I can't believe this. So when I was about 17, I daydreamed about him. And I mean, I was dating somebody else at the time who I thought I was going to marry, right? Like,
Right.
you know, it's not like I took it as reality, but I did hold that energy. And obviously it happened because
Hmm.
he was a farmer and I was able to let it go, right? Um, it wasn't necessarily the smoothest thing. It wasn't, I
Yeah.
didn't dream about all of the regular everyday kind of stuff. But it's in those spaces that you are daydreaming that you do get to create whatever you want. So why not dream about the unicorn, right?
Yeah. So I like to do when I work with people and and they are trying to get from point A to point B, right?
Mhm.
And it's so interesting because I'm like, well, let's pull that timeline in, let's create it. And at first they're kind of like, what are you talking about? Right. And I'm like, let's just have fun with it. So in the beginning, you kind of have to help kind of coach them through, right, to get them started. But really what we're doing is we're trying to get that anytime that we're in daydream land, in the land of imagination, we're really working with that, with our higher self or that subconscious energy, whatever you want to call it, right?
Right.
I I like to call it the magical energy. So it takes a little while because we're so conditioned to be like, no, we have to follow these rules of reality, right?
Mhm.
So after a while, once I get them started, and now we've gotten to the point where the rules go out the window and they can have it anywhere they want. It's so much fun because then you can kind of sit back and, like, we talked about the healer creating that safe space, right? So now we can sit back and really create that safe space where they can say and want whatever they want.
Mhm.
And then, and describe it in whatever detail that they want, and then watch them as and you can kind of help move their energy along with it to help embody all that they're feeling. And that energy, that creative energy, is so much fun. And no matter what you're doing, all of a sudden you could just see them get lost. And usually 9 times out of 10 they get into the daydream mode where they're like, yeah, and then
Understanding. Yeah.
yeah, and then they're like, and then this happens, and you just watch them, and then finally when you're all done, and then you kind of bring them back. It's I always think about like where their energy was at, or kind of like how they were when we started compared to when we get off,
Mhm.
because then they get off and they're like they're still in that space, that feel good space, right? And it's so much fun to just watch how that energy can really change. And then you hear them, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go write all of this down.
Yeah.
And
Which
you're
is
like,
action,
right.
right? It's taking action to go towards that
Yeah.
manifestation. Yeah.
And I'm like, write it down. And then the best part of it is when you say, you can come back to this space and this timeline anytime and either continue the timeline or maybe take a step back and maybe there's something else you want to add to it in the creation. And it's like, I can. So I think a lot of what we lose when we become adults really is I feel like sometimes it gets sucked away from us from, how we have to be adult, we have to pay bills, we got to get a career, you know what I mean? And then we lose all of that childlike energy. That's fun. And man, if you want to be around manifestors, hang out with children.
Yeah.
Like, just like you, I taught kindergarten for a long time. And everybody was like, "How can you do that?" And I'm like, "It's fun." And the stories that they would tell and the things that they would do, but like they'd sit there and say, "Oh my gosh, I want this." And then their imagination would go on however it was that they wanted it.
Mhm.
And then no joke, like a week later,
They would have it.
they have it. And I'm like, man, I just need to be 5 years old again.
Yeah.
Maybe, not when I have to take care of the real world stuff, but when I play when I play in that energy, I want to be 5 years old. Like I want to create like a 5-year-old again, just free, wild, whatever it is. Sorry, I do want to go back to something that you said that was really interesting when you talked about riding your bike and you were completely manifesting, your husband and being on the farm. One thing that's also really important, and I think I may have mentioned this earlier in the beginning, is once you daydream about it, you've got to let it go. And interesting that that's what you did, right? Because you said, I didn't think about this until or 6 months ago, or like what you said right after your husband had passed, right?
Mhm.
Shortly after. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, like I created all of this. So, when we're working in that space, there is no time there. Like there's no timeline. There is absolutely no time, right? There's not like a clock that says, in like 2 years, this is when you're going to get it.
Mhm.
But part of that is just letting it go. And it's hard to fathom, right? As human beings, the idea of no time. But we live in no time so often. We live in that no time right before we fall asleep, right when we're waking up, when we're daydreaming, when we zone out driving home from work and we don't even know how we ended up in the driveway. Like, so we do it a lot. But I find that I love it that you didn't even know that you were really creating. You just thought, well, I'm just going to go with the flow of this. Right. And then there it is. It came to you. So I feel like that's a good example of using like the law of detachment that we oftentimes forget about. And that's really part of what it is that once you create it, you let it go. But what you didn't let go was all of those frequencies that you created and embodied. And so it then, attached to the frequencies that you were wanting and it brought it to you. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I mean, this winds up being this must be a pattern for me, but I can remember essentially, you get into that space and you remember it like you were a child. It's like it's not hard
yeah.
to remember. Like I can remember I honestly, and I said this a lot, like I did like trampolines, but I also liked pools. So my idea was like, eventually my mother got a pool at the house. And my idea was like, I was at my house, my room was on the second floor. So I'm like, if I could put a slide from here, I could get up in the morning, get out of bed and just slide into the pool. And that'd be like the first thing in the morning, be the best thing. Of course, that didn't really happen. But along those lines, I also had a vision of having a room at the end of a hallway that was octagon. It was completely filled with a bed. And then there was a window like just a little bit higher than your head so that you could bounce on the bed and peep up and see what was that. I mean, I think that's great. But
That's awesome. I love
silly
it.
things like that. But, as an adult, it's easy to go back into that space if you allow yourself. And I actually can remember, I just got married this summer. I know this is going to sound weird and I haven't actually articulated this yet, but just like I manifested my first husband while I was riding my bike, I can remember being with my children at a McDonald's and seeing some man who was a father. And I don't know what it was about his energy, but I was like, yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for because he was a responsible father. I'm sure there were other things about him, but it was at that moment that I realized, yeah, that's what I want. And I knew it. I didn't have to tell anybody. It wasn't like I was sharing it with anybody. Well, here we are now. I'm married for 6 months. And in fact, that I know that is when I manifested that. So you start to get more familiar with what that feeling is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can and if you can, I actually had another one that I'm not going to share because it hasn't come yet, but another one, I can remember driving. I was just in the zone, took the normal exit, and I thought, ooh, well, oh, this would be really neat. And I got really excited about that. So I'm excited to see that one come out. But
Oh, that's so cool. Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that energy so much. Well, I actually like with my business, I actually manifested my business and didn't even realize it until probably like a year in it. And then I remember I was sitting in my office space and I'm like, this feels so familiar. And like the
Mhm.
daydream that I had completely came back, much like what you're saying. But it was so interesting because now, like, I do remember sitting there picturing that I'm going to have this business and this business is going to, is going to help people, but really help people learn how to help themselves. And I had no idea what it was, but I remember I was in it and I actually saw myself like helping somebody. And it was just like, it was like the greatest feeling ever. And then, life happens. And of course, the idea of actually like having my own business or being an entrepreneur, I never crossed it.
Yeah.
And then it was interesting because, like, honestly, like when COVID hit, I was like, there's more that I want to do. And then it was just kind of like like that energy took off. So I must have been feeling it again. And then my business just started. And then oddly enough, the office space that I imagined a long time ago is exactly what I have when you like
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and it's crazy. So that's why that's when I sat in it, I was like, this feels so familiar. And then it triggered back. And
Mhm.
who knew, like, when I was putting was like putting my desk in, when I was putting my couches and chairs and other things, it was like, I just knew where everything was supposed to go. Like
Mhm.
I remember I put it there once and that's where it was. So I had already seen it and not even realizing that I was, that I like, I guess subconsciously seeing it again. But it's just interesting because if you would have asked me before COVID or before I started my own business, are you ever going to have your business? I'd be like, oh no, there's no way there's just no way I could do that. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And then I sat there and I'm like, oh, I totally already created this. And I created this like it was years ago and then just completely forgot about it. Cause I was like, oh no, well, I'll
Well, and
just,
what I find too is when the thing that you daydream about and what all this stuff that we're talking about, when it starts to creep its way into reality, it's like, so quickly, like, before it even comes, you're just like, yeah, that's right. Like,
yes.
this is where I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to do. And I don't know how to explain it other than it's just so clear. And it is like a
Mhm.
memory. You're like, oh, yeah, I've been there. Oh, yeah, this is what I want.
Mhm.
Maybe you don't recognize it at first, but the energy of it is what you want. So you
Mhm.
wind up going that way.
Yeah, because it feels so good, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're in coherence with everything. So everything within your body is like shouting, like, this is it, this is it. We feel great. We're in
Right.
alignment. Yeah, because and like also too, I'm glad that you say that because with like friends, family, and stuff, and they're like, I really want this. I think this is it. And so I always ask them like, well, don't think about it. Like, how does it feel? And then when they kind of start to feel into it, they go, well, I do feel like there's a little bit of resistance. And then I'm like, well, feel into that resistance. Is that resistance because it's still creating, or is that like a resistance that said, no, this isn't really what you're needing? So now we've got to we kind of have to transmute the energy a little bit. But I always find like people who I've talked to and they're like, I really feel this is it. And then what happens, right? The
Mhm,
but,
mhm,
you
mhm.
know what I mean? And you're like, I always pay attention to what the but is, right?
Well, that's the thing
Because,
that's holding you back. It's like if somebody
yeah.
says they want something. Well, even me 3 weeks ago. I mean, I think we're all in this pool. We all
Mhm.
are doing this.
Mhm.
3 weeks ago, hey, 9 times out of 10, you ask me at the spur of the moment, what do you want? I'm going to say something. But if I
Yeah.
really get into the feeling of it, it's not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So when my son, my poor son, when he went off to college, I was like, I'm ready. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to move into something smaller. I want more land. Like I had this whole idea of all this stuff that I wanted. And it did. It felt really good. So what do? Because I'm an action person, I call a realtor about my house. Like I just started looking at houses and everything. And as the process was going, one of my friends asked me, she's like, I really want to ask you this. Do you feel that this is really what you want? And of course, just like you said, my first initial reaction was like, yes, of course I want this and, this and that. Like I want this land and I want that. And then when I got quiet about it and I was like, is this what I really want? I could feel that like my energy wasn't in alignment with it. It was in alignment with the idea of maybe having it, but not actually those frequencies of that creative frequency to actually pull it forward. Mm-hmm. So then, come December, I was like, I'm yanking my house off. But what's so interesting is like, I yanked my house off the market because I was like, I'm done with this. I'm going to stay in my house. This is where I feel good. Like, this is where I need to be right now. And I can feel that it's completely in alignment, right? So even today, I had a realtor reach out to me and he's like, I'm just curious when you're going to put your house back on the market. Like I have several people that are very interested in it. So then I go back to that old energy, right? Where I'm like, oh, maybe I should do that. And I was in the middle of like texting him and I was like, well, because originally like I was kind of thinking, well, I'll pull it off, give it some time and then maybe put it back on in February, March. But now I don't feel that way again. Like there's a new excitement about my house. So anyways, so I'm in the middle of texting, right? Because I go back to that old energy and I'm like, oh, well, I'm thinking that I'm going to put it up on, end of January. Right. And then I stop myself and I was like, oh, but that's not true. Like, I don't want to grab onto that energy again. Like, what is it? So then I ended up texting him back and I said, I think maybe eventually I'll put it back on the market. But right now I'm very happy in my house. And it was kind of like, then I could feel that energy align again.
Yeah. It's really funny. It's really funny, even with writing stuff. So like I wrote an email to a mentor of mine and I was explaining, we were talking about pricing of something. And I actually wrote out, this is the price that I think I want to put out there. And, before I may not have been in alignment, but I'm not there now. And then as I go through the process, I'm like, I'm going to delete that whole thing. Right? I'm not going to write any of that, which is funny because then that night I actually had a dream that showed me that I was really not completely in alignment with the pricing. Yeah. And so it's still there, right? It comes and peeps out here, but then you take it away, like you're acknowledging, oh, it's there, but no, it shouldn't be there. Like, let me shift that. Mm-hmm. But yeah. And that's where the subconscious work comes in that works so much, to me, works so much better. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing. I do love this. I love those. I hope these stories help people that at the very minimum to get into that daydream state.
Yeah. And I hope so too, because, even whether you believe in energy or like whatever it is, all these things that we're talking about, everyone can relate to daydreaming. Everybody can relate when it feels so good inside your body, right? Because we all say that, right? Well, we daydream. And then if something is like on the money, right? We go, I just feel so good about it. Yeah. So you're acknowledging, the match of those frequencies that are coming in. So like, if anybody takes anything away and you said it, just keep daydreaming. Yeah. Just be that kid and just keep daydreaming, because anything and everything you want is in that space. And it's not a very big space, but there's a lot that can happen in it. Mm-hmm. So just allow yourself to be in that space and don't limit it by the conscious mind trying to step in and say, well, there is no such thing as unicorns. Right? Like when that happens, I'm like, go away. In this land, it's all unicorns. Yeah. I've got purple ones, pink ones, green ones. It doesn't even matter.
Glitter or sparkle or something.
Right.
Yeah. Oh. Send inquiries, suggestions for new discussion topics, and comments to podcast@happylioncenter.com. That's podcast@happylioncenter.com. If you found this content enjoyable or helpful, please comment, like, share, and download. Donations are appreciated and help us to produce more of similar content.
consider making a contribution at the links in the description box. Your support is greatly appreciated. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Happy Lion Center and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. None of the content provided should be considered a substitute for legal, financial, medical, psychiatric advice or as care from a certified professional.